Additional aids and services are available to individuals with disabilities. To make such a request, please contact us by email, by clicking the Help tab in the PD portal, or at pdportal@tamu.edu, by phone, including Relay Texas at 1-800-441-7323, or in writing to Train PD, PD Portal Support, 4477 TAMU, College Station, Texas 77843. Both a transcript and accessible document of the content presented in this webinar can be found as resources in the course description. Click on the blue links under Course Resources in the description. When a link is clicked, a new browser window will open.
Welcome. I am Veronica Moore. I'm the program specialist with the Texas Workforce Commission, Adult Education and Literacy. Just so you guys can put a name with a face, I will be co-presenting with Fabiana Ramirez, who is our AEL policy analyst, as well as with Tracy Hendricks, who is our T-Call PD specialist. We will also have two master trainers. It will be Tiffany Johnson out of Victoria College. Welcome and thank you for your time here, as well as Dr. Glenda Rose from Community Action Inc., just on some testing information and questions that you have. We're going to be talking about the AEL testing guide of the PY 21-22. And this is, again, is just an overview of that guide. When we're looking at this guide, you will also want to ensure that your staff that are in charge of testing and assessments and administering these tests are also familiar with this guide. The testing guide changed from the AEL assessment guide to the testing guide. So that was the changes that we made. So if you're familiar with the assessment guide, this is an update and a change. We changed the name to testing guide because this encompasses all of the testing information. So today we will be discussing the following. We'll be talking about what is the PY 21-22 testing guide, who is the guide's targeted audience, what are the key items in this testing guide, as well as changes to be noted from the previous guide to this guide, and where you can access the testing guide. And then we'll also be reviewing and understanding the test training chart and the training requirements for your staff that are administering tests within this policy guidance. Next, I will turn it over to Fabiana Ramirez, who will be talking about what is a testing guide.
My name is Fabiana Ramirez. As Veronica said, I'm the policy analyst here at TWC's Adult Ed Department. All right, so what is the testing guide? This is the guide, as Veronica mentioned, formerly called the assessment guide, but we're now calling it the testing guide, just because we don't want any confusion about what this policy is about. It's solely about testing, the testing policy for the state. We didn't want this to get confused with comprehensive assessment, which is a much more holistic assessment of a student. So that is the main reason we changed it to testing guide. So what it does is advises about assessments through testing for all of the Texas approved or Texas NRS approved, and that NRS stands for National Reporting System tests. Those are the approved tests, and we'll talk kind of overview about the how and why we come to approve these tests for use in Texas. And those are allowed in Texas for determining an AEL program eligibility. So again, this guide is for the state of Texas. It's specific to our state, and it just focuses on the pre and post test gains, which we all know as MSG type 1A gains for performance. So the requirements in this guide provide the detailed explanation of the state and local program responsibilities for participant assessment through testing, which is specific under the National Reporting System. Again, NRS is National Reporting System. You'll see that throughout all these slides coming up here, including other federal guidance or WIOA guidance and state requirements. There are two locations where you could find this guide, and that is on the TWC website directly and TCAL's website. Okay, so what is the background for this guide? So why we have a testing guide in the first place? Well, first, it's required. The feds require us, the federal regulations require each state to have what they call an assessment policy and what we're calling a testing policy. We have to submit this each December 31st to the Department of Education. So a few months ago, back in December of 2021, we submitted the testing policy for this upcoming program year, 2022 to 2023, the policy for that program year. So it's a year-to-year thing, just because, things change, tests might be added to that list, and we just want to make it as current as possible. Here on screen, on the left-hand side, you'll see a little citation from the Code of Federal Regulations that says, quote, "A local eligible provider must measure the educational gains of students using only tests that the secretary," and that means the Secretary of Education or the head of Department of Education, "has determined are suitable for use in the national reporting system and that the state has identified in its assessment policy. The only tests our AEL programs can use are those which are outlined in this testing guide." So on the right-hand column there, you'll see also in the federal regulations is a list of items our testing policy must address. So you can click on those two links in the PowerPoint and they'll take you directly to the regulatory guidance, a kind of easier to read NRS assessment tool that provides the list of those required items. And so that is the why and what we're required to have in our policy. And you'll notice, if you're doing kind of a quick compare, that our testing guide follows a very similar organizational format as those listed out in the regulations. From this list, how do we at our state determine what is an NRS approved test? Here's a quick overview of how those tests come to be. The Department of Education, or ED, determines what tests are suitable for reporting in the NRS. So National Reporting System. As needed, what happens is the Department of Ed sends out notices through the Federal Register that outline the approved tests and the expiration dates for each of those. And if you look at that image on the right, it shows a screenshot of the last Federal Register notice from December of 2021. The title of this notice is very to the point. It says, "Test determined to be suitable for use in the NRS for a 7-year period from the publication date of the original notice in which they were announced." So that is kind of the Department of Education's way of saying, hey, these are the updates to the NRS test. We might have said they were going to expire this year. We're extending that, or here's an update on those tests. So that is how we get those notifications. What we then do is update that policy in the testing guide. So from that approved Department of Education list of tests, the TWC AEL, that's us, we publish the list of approved tests from that we can use here in Texas. And I will say we are pretty flexible. We like to provide you with as many options as possible.
So next we'll look at the testing guide and its targeted audience. So what is this testing guide and what's the targeted audience that this guide was developed for? So the testing guide is a formal guide for all AEL grantees and their service providers, to include their staff, your testing supervisors, and other administrators or individuals that administer tests. This guide is also intended for all grantees that are funded under the TWC Adult Education and Literacy Special Initiatives, such as your Accelerate Texas, your Ability to Benefit, and other special, both current and future initiatives, unless otherwise stated in that specific RFP. Additional requirements for tests and reports on the special initiatives will also be provided if there's any kind of differences on that. You want your actual staffing personnel to be familiar with not only the requirements for testing and reporting, but also any testing requirements in this testing guide. This also provides just a proper understanding of the guide as far as measuring foundational things such as effective education, as far as what your students are needing, training, and employment strategies as far as hiring, depending on how large your program or small your program is for individuals that are providing for these specific tests. So next, we'll talk about just a testing guide key items. So just some key items to be familiar with the testing guide. And again, these are not all, exclusive. There's more in the guide. Defining the test validity. We moved from that 150-day rule to now your tests are valid for 365 days. We talk about timely testing. It's important to test timely. And when I say timely testing, that is once the hours occurred, those individuals needed to be tested. And if you're going to test early, that you have to have a justification in that file. You can find testing flexibilities in here when you can administer tests, full battery versus one test to get an individual into your program, understanding performance options, expanding performance options under WIOA, which is type 1 through 5. And you can find these in the performance guide, but I really want to reiterate that this testing guide is a type 1A pre and post test guide and for the providers. WIOA primary indicators. So if you're unsure about what those primary indicators are for your performance accountability or quality assurance, you can find those in this guide too, as far as what are you aiming for or toward. Grant requirements related to testing, how individuals need to be tested, when they need to be tested, as far as eligibility as well. And then individuals to be tested in different content areas, which I spoke of a few minutes ago. You can decipher depending on what that individual's goals are, but ensuring that you have the proper documentation. It does provide that information in this guide as far as the documentation and what's needed as you're enrolling those participants. Participation rate as well and post-testing rate. Some of you may not be familiar with this, but you have a participation rate as well, looking at the number of individuals that become a participant. There's no rate established at this time for the PY 21-22, but you could look forward to seeing that possibly in the future. In this guide, you may also recognize there's a post-testing rate, which is a 65%, meaning the number of individuals that are eligible to be assessed, getting an assessment, and those individuals making a gain. And that rate is at 65% for the PY 21-22 program year. Then you want to look at your TWC AEL approved tests, NRS assessments, which are the CASAs, currently the CASAs, the Best Plus. You have the CASAs, both ESL and HSC, and then you have TABE 11 and 12 and TABE Class E. So those are the only current assessments that are approved for Texas at this time. And then later on, Tracy will talk about some test administration requirements, what's required for your staff as far as those that administer these tests. And next is a performance guide, and I'm going to have Fabiana talk about that performance guide.
So as a reminder, Texas AEL recently in the last year or so published the performance guide. And what this guide does is give an overview on how performance is measured. So for MSG type 1A, that's the pre and post test gains. The performance guide here references the testing guide. So this testing guide has the detail on how participants can achieve that MSG type 1A. So if you want the detail on that, the testing guide is your go-to. All other performance is going to be found in that performance guide. And this isn't all inclusive, it's just kind of the main things. The need for a testing policy, the students to be assessed with an NRS test, and bottom line is that everyone who's enrolling in AEL must have an NRS approved test. That's everyone. There are no exceptions for that. What tests are permitted? The test administration training, which Tracy will go over shortly, accommodations and test specific information that we get from the test publishers. So everything about who should be given this test, the alternate forms, any locators or pre-placement tests, subtests, the test administration training that each publisher may require, and more. And lastly, but equally important, are those quality control procedures. So how and when you enter your data into Teams as it relates to tests.
So looking at changes to note. So as you guys are going through the testing guide, there's changes to note on here. And there's an actual chart of the changes from the previous guide. In Appendix A within this guide, and this is a 72-page guide, but on pages 67 through 72, there's an appendix that has the changes on there. So some of the changes to note from previous is the current guide will also have you look at the test validity. Remember, it's 365 days. Grantees have additional measurable skills gains that they can apply to participants in workplace literacy and integrated education and training, which is a type 1 through 5s. This advises about your participation rate, what that rate is, as well as your post-testing rate. It looks at your educational functioning level placement, how individuals are placed in the EFL levels based on how those tests are given initially, whether you're administering the full battery or if you're providing staggered tests. It also looks at the requirements for content area exemptions as well. If someone is coming from the college and it's a TSI referral, there's different requirements based on that, depending on how many tests or what tests need to be given. Also, those that may be specific to integrated education and training models or activities as well. Remember, in this guide, you can also reference, AEL letter 0320, which is talking about remote testing. This was implemented since the pandemic disaster started a few years ago. So this guide also notes changes for staff requirements and then refresher trainings that Tracy will be talking about. Remember, all individuals that are coming into AEL and being provided AEL service need an approved NRS test. I know that we've given the option of provisional tests in the past, but I wanted to make sure everyone understands those provisional assessments or tests are not counted. Your participants are not counted in your federal reporting for those individuals. So you'll see that on your data. We'll send your weekly, monthly data reports. You'll see those provisional tests. When you see individuals on that report, unless they've received an NRS approved assessment or test, those individuals will not be counted in your reporting data. So it's important that if you're doing the work, you want your program to get counted as well. And if you're not familiar with that, then that's normally sent to the directors or their teams on who is the actual number of individuals that are slated into those non-provisional or non-NRS tests. All NRS tests must be provided prior to direct hours, and all NRS tests must be entered into teams. Whether an individual is making a gain or not, those tests per requirements and monitoring requirements have to be entered into teams.
One of my roles at TCAL is to provide train the trainer events for your programs, especially with regard to testing training. We have several TOT events coming up, and the goal there is to build local capacity with your program so that you have a certified trainer on staff who can then do these things on this chart. We're going to look at a couple of charts. This one is the test training chart with duties and roles kind of outlined of what a certified trainer will do and what a test administrator should do. And this test supervisor here that you can see on the screen, you could use a different term for that at your program. Might be test manager, might be your certified trainer, whatever your program uses for that. You can see that their role, they have several roles here, and one of them is to attend a TOT event because they then become the testing subject matter expert for your program. That trainer is responsible for doing initial training for new staff that need it in order to do test administration training, to do refresher training if that is the refresher requirements for your program, to work with the PD coordinator on scheduling trainings that need to occur for your program, and to be that overall subject matter expert for the test administrators and proctors to go back and ask questions of, and also for your program. And you can see they may serve as the testing point of contact for a consortia as well. These duties will help define what you need these folks to do in your programs. And then you've got the test administrator and proctor. They administer the tests according to the procedures of the test publisher, and they comply with scoring and teams reporting policies and guidelines. So all TAPE, BEST, and CASAS have the same wording across the board there, but that should just help you with those roles and duties of those staff members in your team. I'm here at the TCAL website. I'm going to Institutes, and I'm going to click on Program Management. So this is just a quick and easy way to find this chart, as I mentioned. So I'm going to scroll down a bit under here to general resources, and you can see approved test trainings here. So this is what we're going to look at. And there you'll see the chart. Voila. This chart here tells you the approved test training requirements for all of the testing tools that we use in Texas. So you can see they're all listed here. Then we've got the train of trainer events, test administrator training, and refresher training. Refresher training is required every 2 years for test administrators and proctors. It does tell you on this chart how long a TOT event is, how long the test administrator training is, how long a refresher training is. And actually, all refresher trainings are 3 hours. So that stays constant. Going past the Best Plus 2.0, you're going to start seeing Texas style training. So in Texas, of course, we have to make everything Texas style, right? So we have the Texas style Best Literacy training of trainers and Best Literacy test administrator training. And anything that is in blue, you can click into that. If you are logged into the PD portal, if you click on the blue link, it will take you to a bigger, longer description of that training in the PD portal. Now, if it's not highlighted in blue or hyperlinked here, that's because refreshers are kind of up to the local program and the certified trainer that's working for the program to decide what needs to be covered for the staff. And most of the time, refreshers should cover things like testing procedures, test security, and calibrate scoring of the test instruments. So you can see this note here, programs along with the certified trainer can decide what areas to focus on during the refresher training per the test administrator need. Now going down to CASAS, you can see all of these are hyperlinked. CASAS does have modules on their website, but in Texas, for initial test training, it's got to be the Texas style CASAS modules 1 through 4. So that's really important to remember. Now, when it comes to refresher training, there's a menu here, and you see here on the screen, there's several options that can be taken by the test administrator, at least 3 hours. All of these courses are 1 to 1.5 hours each. And so it's just really important to remember, even though these modules can be available on the CASAS website, for initial training, they have to go through Texas style CASAS modules in order to test in Texas. And one of the reasons we do that, we didn't change the content of their modules, we added to them. And one of the ways we added to them was for the CASAS e-test, for example, we added a practice time to go into the demo site at CASAS and let someone practice how to add a student, add a ticket, get in there and practice. Because if anyone's done test administration and you've gone through the training, it's really helpful to practice. So we can scroll on down here, you'll see DRC. We've got the DRC products here, table 11, 12. You can see all the requirements. Again, this is not hyperlinked because it is up to the certified trainer in the program how they want to do that 3-hour refresher training. We're going to combine the remote test guidance chart with this chart, and we're actually going to put the remote test guidance chart underneath this chart, but we'll hyperlink it up here so it's easy to click into it so that both approved test training charts are together. When you've gone through the initial CASAS training, if you're going to do e-test, you do have to complete this e-test proctor certification on their website to authorize you to proctor e-test. So that doesn't count for PD credit, okay? So you've got to do the modules for PD credit to be a test administrator. This is just an additional step if you're doing e-proctor testing. In Texas, we do everything our way, right? So we have the Texas 2-step for remote testing. This is really important to remember because it can get confusing. Anyone who's going to do remote testing first must do test administrator training. That's critical. That's just your first step, bottom line thing to do remote testing. So the second step then is to do the remote test administration training for Texas. So these courses are in the PD portal and they are webinars. Remember, anyone who's going to do remote testing, do test administrator training first, and then watch the remote test administrator trainings for Texas webinars in the portal based on what testing tool that you use. This is a screenshot to show you how to find those remote test trainings. This is an example of TABE, and you could even put TABE in there. I happen to put TABE 1112 and then just the word remote, and it'll pull up that training for you, and you can take that course and keep that documentation on hand in your file. You do the same thing with CASAS, remote. You just put those two keywords in, and BEST, remote, and the same thing will pull up for you. TWC has decided that a remote refresher is required every 2 years. So the current guidance is to retake the remote training webinars that we have in the portal right now. Here's a refresher question. If test administrators miss taking the refresher at the 2-year mark exactly, do they have to take the original test training all over again? And the answer from TWC was that test administrators must complete the refresher before they can continue to administer tests. So you don't have to take the whole test administrator training over again. The refresher is really important to take before they can begin testing any more students. A test administrator training has a refresher. Anyone who's a test administrator has to take a 3-hour refresher every 2 years. So additionally, if that person or any test administrator conducts remote testing, they also need to do remote testing refresher, which is about an hour, hour and a half, depending on the testing tool. Both of those things are going to be required if someone is doing remote testing.
So just to kind of keep everyone in the loop of where they can find these test administrator training information, the testing guide, they're located in 2 different locations. If you go onto the TWC website, it will show the AEL testing guide for PY 21-22. Here, you will also be able to find other guidance that we put out. There's the Texas AEL guide that we're also going to be updating. And then you'll also be able to see the performance guide as well at this location. And you can pair this together because although the testing guide is the type 1A, your pre and post test, but when you're looking at measurable skills gains, you're also able to look at that AEL performance guide for that. The second location is on the TCAL site, and you would go under the TCAL, Welcome to AEL, go underneath the Texas AEL, it's under Policy and Guidance, and then you'll be able to see the Texas AEL testing guide.
So I mentioned a few slides ago that back in December, we submitted our testing policy for the upcoming program year. That's the 2022 to 2023 year, which starts July 1st. So in just a few months here, that new policy will be posted and in effect for that program year. But I just want to flag that there's no major differences. So just minor changes. We just like to keep it as updated as possible. So once we get approval from the Department of Education, we will likely share that out. But here are the few updates on that. No changes on the test. So the tests that you're currently using remain the same. I will say a few months ago, the Department of Ed let us know that there are certain tests that have extended expiration dates. So we'll flag that in this new program testing guide, which tests those are and to what dates they've been extended. Minor updates relate to documentation for paper-based versus computer-based tests. So it's really just small tweaks, but stay tuned. That'll be coming out fairly soon here.
Looking at the testing guide for PY 21-22, please familiarize yourself with the testing guide for PY 21-22. We always say small changes have big impacts, and there are some noted changes to the guide that were not in the previous guide or some things that have been updated. And remember, those changes do have impacts on your program performance, your implementation, and your requirements. And also just stay tuned for any of the updates that are coming out in PY 22-23. We are ending this 3rd quarter and rounding into the 4th quarter and the end of the program year. So we will be having updates on that as well. You can always submit them to the AELTA at twc.texas.gov If it's something related to Teams, I have the Teams technical assistance information there as well. You have to remember that you have to test, pre-test and post-test with the same instrument. So timing is very important as far as when you're transitioning one test to another test, maybe moving from BEST to a CASAS as well. If you're looking to assist the students in making gains in that, then normally what you would have to do is you would have to post-test them in original test that BEST if you're not going to have enough time to do it in that CASAS.
Does staff, the admin, staff, instructors, and aides, do they need to be marked in Teams as a test proctor for the secondary job when they complete their specific testing training?
I would say yes, if the individuals that are administering or assisting with the administration of those tests. It's important that you want to label individuals on the actual activities and jobs that they do as well. Therefore, where there's any question about who administered this test, then you also have it in Teams as a backup for monitoring purposes.
Is there a separate training for ESL testing with CASAS?
There's not a separate training, but during the training, you were given some literacy screening tools that are only used with ESL. So you need to pay attention to the different intake process for ESL.
We made the switch to CASAS, but we were noticing that participants are scoring much higher NRS levels than with the TABE. Is this something others are seeing or have seen when switching to CASAS?
TABE is actually harder than the GED. So if you're using TABE, the scores are going to be lower. CASAS is going to give you a pretty good idea of whether they're ready to test or not, but they may score higher, especially if you don't put the fear of God in them about not guessing, especially on intake. If they guess, you end up getting an out of range score and having to test again, and you don't want to do that. So the biggest problem I've seen with people who aren't showing gains or having them test too high on CASAS is the students are guessing. It's going to mess up your score. It's also going to mess up your progress testing.
Just remember to familiarize yourself with a testing guide and also looking at the test publisher's requirements because they do have specific requirements.
Well, thank you, everybody.
We hope you enjoyed this pre-recorded webinar. After you have passed the final test with a score of 80% or greater and have received your certificate of completion, please take a few moments to complete the course evaluation. Participant feedback helps Train PD at TCAL continue to provide high-quality professional development. To leave a course feedback, please go to the completed portion of your transcript. To do this, hover over the My Learning tab and select View Your Transcript. Click on the drop-down arrow next to the word Active and select Completed. Then, click Evaluate in the drop-down menu next to the course you just completed. Please note that your feedback is greatly appreciated.